First time my family tried to erase me, it happened in a room full of flowers. Not metaphorically, literally. White lilies, pale roses, polished wood, and a quiet that felt rehearsed. My grandmother's memorial service had been scheduled for 10 sharp on a Tuesday morning, and by 10:20, I already knew something was wrong. My name wasn't on the program. I stood in the back of St. Michael's Community Chapel in Cedar Falls, Iowa, holding a folded coat over my arm. Watching people I shared blood with move past me like I was part of the furniture. My older sister, Vanessa Carter, stood near the front row in a tailored black dress, speaking softly to our mother, Judith Carter. They didn't look at me. Not once. I was 29 years old. I worked 60 hours a week as a compliance analyst for a regional manufacturing firm, managed risk audits worth millions, and paid my own mortgage. But in that room, I was invisible again. Before I go any further, let me pause for a moment. If you've ever been the one quietly holding everything together while someone else takes the credit, you already know this feeling. If stories like this resonate with you, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and drop a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Then stay with me, because this didn't start in a chapel, and it didn't end there either. It started with a phone call 3 weeks earlier. My mother, Judith, called me at 6:12 a.m. on a Friday. That alone should have warned me. She never called unless something needed fixing. "Evelyn," she said, using my full name the way she did when she was already irritated. "Your grandmother passed last night, peacefully." There was a pause. I waited for more. There wasn't any. "I'm sorry," I said finally. My grandmother, Margaret Lewis Carter, had raised me more than my own parents ever did. When my father died when I was 13, it was Grandma Margaret who made sure I ate, studied, and didn't disappear into myself. "We're handling the arrangements," my mother continued. "Vanessa is helping. We'll let you know if we need anything." If we need anything. I remember standing in my kitchen afterward, coffee going cold in my hand, staring at the wall where sunlight hadn't reached yet. Something about that call felt finished, like a door closing softly, deliberately. At the service, that feeling became clarity. Vanessa read a eulogy, a long one. She talked about Sunday dinners, about how close she and Grandma had been, about advice whispered over tea. People nodded. A few cried. I didn't correct the record. I never did. What I noticed instead was the way my mother squeezed Vanessa's hand when she finished, the way relatives turned toward her with sympathy, as if she were the only granddaughter who mattered. After the service, my Aunt Lorraine pulled me aside near the coat rack. "I didn't know you were coming," she said, not unkindly. "Judith said you were busy." Busy. That word would follow me for months. 2 days later, I found out why. The will reading was scheduled for the following Wednesday at the office of Thomas H. Klein, the attorney who had handled my grandmother's estate for over 20 years. His office was on Main Street, 2nd floor, above a tax service and a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon. My mother arrived first. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes later, coffee in hand, already seated at the head of the table by the time I walked in. I took the chair nearest the door. Thomas adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Margaret was very specific," he said, looking at the document in front of him. "Her estate includes liquid assets totaling approximately $480,000, her residence on Maple Drive, and controlling shares in Carter Floral Group." That got Vanessa's attention. Carter Floral Group was the family business. 3 storefronts, 2 warehouses, and a brand my grandmother had built from nothing. "The business," Thomas continued, "will be transferred to Vanessa Carter in full." Vanessa smiled. My mother exhaled, like something had gone exactly as planned. "And the house?" my mother asked. "The Maple Drive residence is to be sold. Proceeds split equally between Judith Carter and Vanessa Carter." I waited. My hands were calm. That should have told me everything. Thomas finally looked up at me. "Evelyn Carter," he said, carefully, "your grandmother left you her personal effects and a letter." Just a letter. Vanessa turned toward me for the first time that day. Her expression wasn't triumphant. It was dismissive. Like this was a formality, something to get through before lunch. The letter was handed to me in a plain envelope. My name was written in my grandmother's looping script. Nothing else. No shares, no property, no voice. Outside the office, my mother stopped me on the stairs. "You understand," Judith said, lowering her voice, "that this makes sense. Vanessa has always been involved in the business." "Involved," I repeated. "She sacrificed," my mother said sharply. "You chose your career." I looked at her then. Really looked. At the familiar tightness around her mouth, the impatience in her eyes. This wasn't new. This was patterned. "I was never asked," I said. She waved that away. "Don't make this difficult, Evelyn. Your grandmother knew what she was doing." That night, alone in my living room, I opened the letter. It wasn't long, 2 pages, handwritten. And by the time I reached the second paragraph, I realized my grandmother hadn't left me nothing. She had left me a warning. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Outside, my phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. "We should talk. Mom's upset. Don't drag this out." I didn't reply. Because for the first time, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't about grief, or business, or fairness. It was about control. And they had underestimated me. They always did. By the end of that week, I would lose my standing in the family. By the end of the month, I would be accused of betrayal. And before this was over, every assumption they had ever made about me would come back to haunt them. They thought I would stay quiet. They were wrong. I didn't read my grandmother's letter again that night. I already knew if I did, I wouldn't sleep. Instead, I poured a glass of water, sat on the edge of my couch, and stared at the city lights outside my apartment window. Cedar Falls looked peaceful from the 8th floor. Orderly. Predictable. Nothing like the quiet violence that had just taken place inside a law office with beige walls and stale coffee. By morning, my phone had confirmed what my instincts already knew. Vanessa had spoken first. The messages started at 7:03 a.m. Vanessa Carter. "I don't know why you looked so upset yesterday. Grandma made her choice." Vanessa Carter. "You've always been independent. This shouldn't affect you." Vanessa Carter. "Mom's really hurt by your attitude." Hurt by my attitude. I hadn't said a word. I was 30 days into a new quarter at work, overseeing compliance for a $62 million supplier audit. I had deadlines stacked like dominoes, but all morning my mind kept drifting back to Thomas Klein's office, to the way Vanessa sat before the will was even read, like she already knew the ending. At lunch, I finally unfolded the letter again. My grandmother, Margaret Lewis Carter, never wasted words. She had grown up during rationing, raised a business through recessions, and buried a husband and a son without theatrics. Her handwriting was steady, the ink dark. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means I made a decision others won't like. I need you to understand why, even if you don't agree with it yet." I paused there. Even if you don't agree with it yet. She went on to write about the business, about how Carter Floral Group had become something fragile in the wrong hands, about how charm and ambition could look like leadership to people who weren't paying attention. Then the sentence that made my throat tighten. "I have watched how you listen, how you notice, how you don't need applause to do the right thing. That matters more than ownership." She wasn't apologizing. She was explaining. Do not let anyone rush you into giving up your voice. Silence can look like peace, but it isn't always. I trust you to know the difference." There was no mention of money, no instructions, just that. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into my work bag. At 4:46 p.m., my mother called. "Come by tonight," Judith said. "We need to talk, as a family." I knew better than to ask what that meant. Her house was 15 minutes away, a split-level colonial she'd lived in since my father died. When I pulled into the driveway, Vanessa's car was already there. Of course it was. Inside, my mother had set the kitchen table like a negotiation room. 3 chairs, tea already poured. Vanessa sat to her right, scrolling on her phone, perfectly relaxed. "We're concerned," Judith began, fingers wrapped tightly around her mug. "You've been distant." Vanessa looked up. "You left without saying goodbye yesterday." I met her eyes. There didn't seem to be anything left to say. "That's dramatic," Vanessa replied lightly. "This isn't personal." I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, recognition. "Then explain to me," I said evenly, "why I wasn't consulted about the business at all." My mother answered before Vanessa could. "You live alone. You don't have children. You don't understand what it takes to maintain something long-term. There it was. Vanessa smiled, just slightly. I do understand, I said. I manage compliance risk across 4 states. I'm responsible for preventing regulatory shutdowns. Long-term thinking is my job. That's different, my mother snapped. This is family. Vanessa leaned forward. Look, Evelyn, no one is trying to cut you out. But Grandma trusted me with the company. Fighting it will just make things ugly. I'm not fighting, I said. I'm asking questions. About what? Vanessa asked. You got a letter. Isn't that what you wanted? Closure? I stood up then. Slowly. Calmly. This conversation is over, I said. When you're ready to acknowledge that I exist beyond being inconvenient, you know how to reach me. My mother's face hardened. If you walk out now, don't expect things to go back to normal. I paused at the doorway. Normal for who? No one answered. The shift happened quietly after that. Family group texts stopped including me. Cousins I'd grown up with stopped returning calls. At my Aunt Lorraine's birthday dinner, I wasn't invited. When I asked why, she sounded uncomfortable. Vanessa said you needed space, she said. After everything I hadn't done. At work, I started staying later. Not because I needed to, but because being competent felt grounded. 2 weeks later, the rumor reached me through a coworker whose sister worked at Carter Floral Group. They're saying you tried to pressure your grandmother before she died, she said carefully. That you were angry about the will. I stared at her. Who is they? I already knew. That night, I received a voicemail from my mother. I raised you better than this, Judith said, dragging your sister's name through the mud. If you keep this up, don't expect a relationship with us. I deleted it without replying. The truth was simpler than they wanted to admit. I hadn't lost anything yet, but they were already preparing to make sure I did. And somewhere between the quiet dinners alone and the deliberate exclusions, I realized this wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about erasing my credibility before I could use it. They were afraid. And fear always escalates. I didn't know yet how far they were willing to go, but I would soon. Because 3 days later, an email landed in my inbox that changed the stakes completely. Subject line: Carter Floral Group, Emergency Board Update. And my name wasn't on the list. I found out I had been removed from the Carter Floral Group advisory mailing list the same way I found out most things in my family, accidentally. The email wasn't sent to me. It was forwarded by a junior compliance officer named Rachel Monroe, whose cousin worked payroll at one of the floral warehouses. She didn't know what it meant. She thought I did. The subject line read, Carter Floral Group, Emergency Board Update. Timestamp, 11:18 a.m. Rachel had added a single line above the forwarded thread. Thought you should see this. Isn't this your family's company? I didn't open it right away. Instead, I finished reviewing a supplier risk matrix, submitted a report to legal, and closed out 2 pending audits. Muscle memory. Control where you can. Then I opened the email. It was from Vanessa Carter, sent to a group labeled Executive Advisory Committee. The list included our mother, Judith Carter, 2 longtime store managers, the company's outside accountant, and a lawyer I didn't recognize. The message was brief. Due to recent instability and internal conflict, we are restructuring decision authority effective immediately. This is to protect the company from reputational harm during a sensitive transition period. Instability, internal conflict, reputational harm. I scrolled. Attached was a revised governance document. My name appeared once, under a section titled Non-Operational Family Members. No voting rights, no access to financials, no consultative role. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling of my office. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed. Life continued, oblivious. They weren't just cutting me out emotionally anymore. They were building a paper trail. That night, I drove past the Maple Drive house, the one my grandmother had lived in for 43 years. A for sale sign sat in the yard already, 3 days after the will reading. Efficient. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. At home, I poured a glass of wine and pulled my grandmother's letter from my bag again. I read it more carefully this time. Not emotionally. Practically. She had been preparing me. The next morning, I requested a personal day and drove to Thomas Klein's office. He recognized me immediately. "You look like someone who has questions," he said, motioning me into his conference room. "I want to understand what my grandmother anticipated," I replied. "Not emotionally. Legally." He nodded once. "That's a fair request." I placed the letter on the table between us. Thomas read it slowly. When he finished, he didn't speak right away. "Margaret was very deliberate," he finally said. "She amended her will twice in the last 18 months. Both times after meetings involving Vanessa." I kept my face neutral. "What kind of meeting?" "Vendor negotiations, expansion talks, discussions about leverage." Leverage. The word sat heavy between us. "Did she ever express concern?" I asked. Thomas hesitated. "She asked me a hypothetical about what protections existed if family members acted in bad faith." My chest tightened, just slightly. And I told her the truth, that ownership gives power, but documentation gives protection. I left his office with a copy of the will history, a list of corporate filings, and a quiet sense that this was no longer just family drama. This was strategy. By the end of the week, the narrative had fully shifted. Vanessa posted a carefully worded message on LinkedIn about stepping into leadership during a challenging season. My mother shared it with a heart emoji. At Sunday dinner, which I only learned about afterward through social media, my absence was noticeable enough for someone to ask. Vanessa's reply, captured in a tagged photo caption, was simple. "Evelyn needed space." That phrase again. Space. As if exile were self-care. The call that changed everything came from someone unexpected. David Ramirez, Carter Floral Group's logistics manager, called me from his personal phone at 9:38 p.m. "I probably shouldn't be doing this," he said without preamble. But it didn't sit right. "Doing what?" I asked. "Signing off on the warehouse lease extension," he replied. "Vanessa fast-tracked it. Triple the rate. 10-year term." I sat up. "That doesn't make sense. That warehouse was due for renegotiation next quarter." "She said the board approved it," David said. "But no one saw the full contract. Just a summary." "A summary, of course. Why tell me?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. "Because your grandmother wouldn't have," he said. "And because you always asked the right questions." After we hung up, I didn't call anyone. I opened my laptop. By midnight, I had pulled public records, lease filings, and vendor disclosures. Patterns emerged quickly once I stopped pretending this was coincidence. Vanessa wasn't consolidating power. She was cashing out in slow motion. And she was doing it under my grandmother's name. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me precise. By the time I closed my laptop, I understood the shape of what was coming. Not all of it, but enough. They thought removing me early would neutralize me. They thought silence meant surrender. What they didn't understand was this. I had spent my entire career identifying risk before it exploded. And right now, my family was the biggest liability in the room. The next move wasn't emotional. It was procedural. And once it started, there would be no way to stop it without telling the truth out loud, which was exactly what they had been trying to prevent. I went to bed calm, because I finally knew what I needed to do, and because the next time my name came up in a room without me, it wouldn't stay that way for long. The first thing I did was nothing. That sounds counterintuitive, but it wasn't. Silence, when used deliberately, creates space. And in that space, people reveal themselves. For 2 weeks, I didn't call my mother, didn't reply to Vanessa's messages, didn't correct the rumors that filtered back to me through mutual acquaintances. I went to work, logged 12-hour days, and documented everything. Every forwarded email, every contract David Ramirez mentioned, every corporate filing that bore my grandmother's name, but not her judgment. At night, I built timelines. Vanessa's leadership announcement had come 5 days after the will reading. The warehouse lease had been rushed through 8 business days later. A consulting contract with a marketing firm Vanessa had once worked for appeared shortly after that. 6 figures. No competitive bids. Patterns aren't emotional. They're mathematical. The second thing I did was call a lawyer. Her name was Allison Moore, a corporate litigation attorney based in Des Moines. I found her through a referral from a compliance colleague who trusted her with a hostile takeover case involving family-owned assets. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The will, the letter, the governance changes, the lease, the exclusion. When I finished, She asked one question. What do you want? I didn't answer immediately. I want the truth documented, I said finally. And I want my grandmother's business protected from being dismantled. Allison nodded once. Then we don't move loudly. We move correctly. We started with what couldn't be argued. Vanessa had assumed sole control of Carter Floral Group without formal board ratification. She had restructured governance based on an internal memo, not a filed amendment. And she had signed contracts that materially altered the company's financial position without full disclosure. None of that required family testimony. It required records. While Allison worked through formal discovery requests, I took a personal day and drove to Maple Drive. The house was empty now. Furniture gone, curtains removed. It smelled like cleaning solvent and loss. In the study, I found the last thing my grandmother had touched, a filing cabinet drawer, still locked. The realtor hadn't bothered with it. Inside were handwritten ledgers, old school, dates, numbers, notes in the margins. Margaret Lewis Carter didn't trust spreadsheets. She trusted memory and ink. The ledgers told a different story than the polished reports Vanessa had been sharing, one that showed reserves, contingencies, long-term planning that didn't align with rapid liquidation. I photographed everything. When I left, I locked the drawer again. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Vanessa showed up at my apartment unannounced the following Saturday. She didn't knock. She rang the buzzer twice, impatient. I let her in. She looked around my living room like she was cataloging what she could use against me. Then she smiled. "You've been quiet," she said. "People are starting to talk." "About what?" I asked. "About you," she replied. "About whether you're okay." I sat across from her. "Is that concern or strategy?" Her smile thinned. "Mom is worried," she said. "She thinks you're spiraling." I nodded. "That's unfortunate." Vanessa crossed her legs. "We can fix this. You just need to sign a release, acknowledging that you're not involved in the business. What do I get in return?" I asked. She leaned in. "Peace." I met her gaze. "You've never offered me that before." Her eyes flickered, just for a second. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "You were never meant to run anything." I stood up then. Slowly. "Get out." Vanessa laughed, but it wasn't relaxed. "You don't have the leverage you think you do." I opened the door. "We'll see." She left without another word. That night, my mother called. "I don't recognize you anymore," Judith said. "Vanessa is trying to hold things together, and you're undermining her." I didn't argue. "I'm protecting Grandma's work," I said. "If that looks like undermining to you, we're speaking different languages." She hung up on me. 3 days later, Allison forwarded me a document, a formal notice of investigation. It wasn't public yet, but it would be. Carter Floral Group had triggered a compliance review based on irregular filings and undisclosed conflicts of interest. Vanessa had no idea. Not yet. I stared at the email for a long time. This wasn't revenge. Not in the way people imagine it. This was gravity. And gravity doesn't care how confident you are when you step off the edge. By the end of the month, the company would be frozen in place. Accounts reviewed, contracts scrutinized. And the story my family had been telling about me would no longer be the loudest one in the room. Because soon, the facts would speak. And facts don't take sides. They just land hard. The first sign that things were unraveling came on a Thursday morning, disguised as politeness. Vanessa called me at 8:41 a.m. Not text, not voicemail, a call. I let it ring twice before answering. "Evelyn," she said, too evenly. "We need to talk." I pictured her in her corner office at Carter Floral Group. Glass walls, fresh arrangements on every surface. The illusion of control carefully curated. She never called unless she needed something. "I'm listening," I said. There was a pause. Just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. "An auditor contacted us," she said, asking questions. I didn't respond. "They're asking about the warehouse lease," she continued. "About consulting expenses. About governance changes." Still, nothing from me. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" she asked, finally letting the edge show. I looked out my apartment window at the morning traffic, calm in a way that surprised even me. "If the company is being reviewed," I said, "that means someone filed concerns. That's not my role anymore, remember? I was designated non-operational." Silence. "Then Mom is stressed. Vanessa said quickly. She hasn't been sleeping. There it was, the emotional lever, the one that had always worked before. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied. This might be a good time for transparency. Her voice hardened. Are you threatening us? No, I said. I'm opting out of being managed by guilt. The line went dead. At work, I finished a presentation on regulatory exposure for a client acquisition valued at $18 million. My team applauded. My director pulled me aside afterward. You're sharp lately, he said. Focused. I smiled. I've had practice. That evening, my phone buzzed with a family group message I hadn't been included in for months. Judith Carter had added me back. Judith, we are meeting Sunday at noon, all of us. This situation has gone too far. Too far. As if I'd been the one, quietly rewriting rules and signing contracts in back rooms. Sunday came gray and cold. I arrived at my mother's house at 11:58 a.m. Vanessa's car was already there. So were two others. Inside the living room sat Uncle Raymond Carter, my father's older brother, and Diane Keller, the company's outside accountant. I recognized her immediately. She avoided my eyes. This wasn't a family meeting. This was an intervention. We sat. No food, no pretense of warmth. Judith spoke first. We're concerned about the damage being done, to the family, to the business. Vanessa folded her hands. We believe Evelyn has been feeding information to outsiders. I looked at her. You mean auditors? Diane shifted uncomfortably. This isn't about legality, my mother snapped. This is about loyalty. I felt something click into place. Quiet. Final. Loyalty to whom? I asked. Grandma, or whoever benefits fastest? Uncle Raymond cleared his throat. Margaret wanted harmony. Margaret wanted sustainability, I corrected. Those aren't the same thing. Vanessa stood. This is exactly what I mean. She twists everything. She always has. I stayed seated. You signed a 10-year lease at triple market rate without full board approval, I said calmly. You contracted a firm with a direct conflict of interest, and you altered governance without filing amendments. Those aren't opinions. They're facts. Diane's face went pale. Vanessa stared at me. You don't know what you're talking about. I do, I said, because I've read the filings, and so have the auditors. My mother looked between us. Auditors? That was the moment the room shifted. Judith's hands trembled. Review for what? Potential mismanagement, Diane said quietly. Vanessa rounded on her. You said this was routine. It was. No one spoke for several seconds. Then my mother looked at me, eyes wide, something like fear cracking through years of certainty. You did this, she said. I shook my head. Vanessa did this. I just didn't stop it. No, Vanessa snapped. She planned this. She's been waiting. I finally stood. I waited my entire life to be seen, I said evenly. I didn't wait for this. I picked up my coat. If you want to talk about repairing the business, call me through counsel, I added. If you want to talk about blame, don't. I walked out. In my car, my hands were steady. That night, messages poured in. Cousins, former employees, a store manager who had worked for my grandmother for 27 years. We always knew you were the careful one. Margaret trusted you. Be careful. Vanessa is panicking. They were right. 3 days later, the review went public. Local business news ran a headline about Carter Floral Group entering a compliance audit amid leadership transition concerns. Investors paused. Vendors delayed contracts. Vanessa posted nothing. Judith didn't call. Instead, they're asking for testimony. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. This was the point of no return. Before we go any further, let me pause here. If you're still with me, you already know this isn't just about a family business. It's about what happens when favoritism meets accountability. If this story feels familiar, like the button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you've ever been the one blamed for finally speaking up. Now stay with me, because what happened next didn't just expose the truth. It changed who held power. And once power shifts, nothing ever goes back to the way it was. It was delivered to my office reception desk at 9:17 a.m., stamped, sealed, impersonal. I didn't open it right away. I thanked the receptionist, walked back to my desk, and finished reviewing a compliance memo like nothing had changed. Then I read it. Request for testimony. Voluntary at first. Formal if declined. I forwarded it to Allison Moore without comment. She called me 10 minutes later. They're moving faster than I expected, she said. That usually means they've already found something. What do you need from me? I asked. Patience, she replied. And precision. That afternoon, Vanessa texted me for the first time in weeks. Vanessa Carter. We don't have to do this. Vanessa Carter. You're blowing up Mom's health over paperwork. Vanessa Carter. Call me. I didn't respond. At 6:30 p.m., my mother left a voicemail. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Evelyn, Judith said. I don't understand why you're letting this go so far. Families handle things privately. Privately. The word tasted bitter now. I deleted the voicemail. 2 days later, Allison and I met in her office. She had printed copies of the warehouse lease, the consulting contracts, the governance memo, and my grandmother's handwritten ledgers. Spread out on the table, the story told itself without emotion. Vanessa backdated approval language, Allison said, tapping one page. And this consulting firm is owned by her former partner. That's a material conflict. And the ledgers? I asked. All they do is confirm intent, she replied. Your grandmother planned conservatively. Vanessa acted aggressively. That discrepancy matters. I nodded. Here's the part you need to be ready for, Allison continued. They're going to question your motives. I met her eyes. They always have. The first interview took place the following week in a government office building downtown. Beige walls, fluorescent lights. 2 investigators, 1 recorder. They asked me about my relationship with my grandmother, about my role in the company, about when I first noticed irregularities. I answered calmly, factually, without embellishment. At one point, one of the investigators asked, Did you feel excluded by the will? I paused, just long enough to be honest without being reactive. I felt informed, I said. My grandmother explained her reasoning. What concerned me wasn't what I didn't receive. It was what others did with what they received. They nodded. They wrote things down. When I left, I felt lighter. Not vindicated, just aligned. The backlash came fast. Vanessa posted a public statement the next morning, framed as concern. It's painful when family matters are dragged into legal arenas, she wrote. We are committed to transparency and healing. Comments flooded in. Supportive, skeptical, curious. My mother's friends began calling me. One after another. You've embarrassed Judith. She did her best raising you. Why couldn't you just let Vanessa handle it? I stopped answering unknown numbers. At work, my director called me into his office. I need to ask you something, he said carefully. Is this situation going to affect your performance? I met his gaze. No. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good. Because legal requested you for a cross-functional advisory role starting next quarter. I blinked. Requested me? They've been watching how you handle pressure, he said. And documentation. I left his office with a new title and a quiet sense of irony. The family meeting request came that night, from my mother. Please, just us. I need to understand. Against Allison's advice, I agreed. Neutral location. Public place. We met at a diner halfway between our homes. Judith arrived early. She looked tired, older. I never wanted this, she said, before I even sat down. I know, I replied. Vanessa wasn't there. That told me everything. Vanessa says you're trying to punish her, my mother continued. That you've always resented her. I stirred my coffee slowly. Did she tell you about the lease? Judith hesitated. She said it was necessary. The consulting contract? I asked. She said it was strategic. The governance memo? I pressed. Silence. I leaned back. Mom, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm letting consequences exist. Tears welled in her eyes. You're tearing the family apart. I met her gaze, steady. No. I stopped holding it together by myself. She didn't have an answer for that. When we parted, she hugged me awkwardly, like someone unsure where the boundaries were now. 2 days later, Vanessa's attorney contacted Allison. They wanted to negotiate. Allison smiled when she told me. That's not remorse, she said. That's fear. By the end of the month, Carter Floral Group's accounts were temporarily frozen pending review. Store managers were interviewed. Employees whispered. Vanessa, stop posting altogether. The night before my formal testimony, I sat alone in my apartment and reread my grandmother's letter one last time. Do not let anyone rush you into giving up your voice. I slept well, because for the first time, my silence wasn't mistaken for weakness. And the next chapter wouldn't be written by family dynamics. It would be written on record. If you're still listening, stay with me. And if you've ever watched someone scramble when accountability finally catches up, you already know what comes next. Like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you'd have handled this differently. Because when the truth is documented, denial gets very loud and very desperate. The day Vanessa Carter testified, it rained. Not the dramatic kind. No thunder, no downpour. Just a steady, patient drizzle that soaked everything slowly, like time insisting on its point. I wasn't in the room when she went in. Allison Moore had been clear about that. Separate entrances, separate timelines. No accidental encounters. Still, I arrived early. I sat on a wooden bench in the hallway outside Conference Room B, hands folded in my lap, posture straight. People passed me without looking twice. To them, I was just another woman waiting for paperwork to catch up with her life. I had waited my whole life. This felt familiar. Vanessa emerged an hour and 12 minutes later. She didn't see me at first. Her lawyer walked ahead, talking too fast, already explaining damage control. Vanessa followed a step behind, shoulders stiff, face pale in a way makeup couldn't fix. She looked smaller than I remembered. When her eyes finally met mine, she stopped. The lawyer kept walking, then noticed, turned, paused, and quietly stepped away. Professional courtesy. Or maybe instinct. We stood there, 10 feet apart, saying nothing. Vanessa broke first. You planned this, she said. Not loudly, not accusing, just tired. I shook my head once. I documented it. Her mouth tightened. You always had to be right. I always had to be careful, I corrected. She laughed softly, without humor. Do you know what they asked me? I didn't respond. They asked why I rushed the lease, why I didn't disclose the consulting firm, why I changed governance language without filing. She swallowed. They asked if I believed I was untouchable. And? I asked. She looked at the floor. I said I thought family would protect me. There it was. The assumption. The entitlement. They asked about you, she continued. About why you weren't included. I waited. I told them you didn't care, she said, that you never wanted the business. I met her eyes. And did that work? She didn't answer. Allison stepped into the hallway then, briefcase in hand. She nodded at me once, a silent signal. Time to leave. As I walked past Vanessa, she spoke again. You could have warned me. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I did, I said. For years. That was the last thing I said to her that day. The following weeks were quiet in a way that felt unnatural. No calls from my mother. No texts from extended family. Even the whispers died down, replaced by a heavy pause, like everyone was waiting to see where the truth would land. At work, my new advisory role became official. I was pulled into meetings I'd never been invited to before. My opinions were asked for, documented, respected. It was disorienting. Not because it was unfamiliar, because it was overdue. One afternoon, while reviewing a risk mitigation plan, my phone buzzed with a message from Uncle Raymond. I owe you an apology. I should have asked questions sooner. I read it once, then twice. I didn't respond right away. Apologies mean different things depending on timing. The formal findings were released on a Friday afternoon. Misrepresentation of authority. Failure to disclose conflicts of interest. Breach of fiduciary duty. Vanessa Carter was removed from executive control, pending restructuring. The company would survive. Barely. But it would survive. My mother called that night. She didn't speak for a long time after I answered. I didn't know, Judith said finally. I know, I replied. She says you ruined her, my mother continued. I leaned against my kitchen counter. No. I stopped covering for her. Judith's breath hitched. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to, I said. You just have to stop pretending it didn't happen. Another silence. Then, quietly, I should have listened to you. I closed my eyes. That was the closest I would ever get to an apology. The next morning, I drove past the Carter Floral Group flagship store on my way to work. The windows were still dressed in spring colors. Customers still came and went. Life moved on. Vanessa was no longer there. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved, because what I had reclaimed wasn't power. It was authorship. And once you stop letting other people write your role, the story changes whether they're ready or not. I didn't know what Chapter 8 would bring yet, but for the first time, I knew exactly whose voice would be telling it. When people think the truth ends a story, they've usually never lived through one. The truth doesn't end anything. It rearranges the room and waits to see who can still stand. 2 days after the findings were released, I received an email from the interim board of Carter Floral Group. Subject line, neutral. Language, careful. They were requesting my presence at a restructuring meeting the following week. Not as a witness, not as family, as a consultant. I read the email twice, then forwarded it to Allison Moore. Her reply came back within minutes. You don't attend without terms. We drafted them that afternoon. Limited scope, document access, no personal liability. And one line I insisted on adding myself. All communications in writing. The meeting was held in the same building where Vanessa had once announced her leadership role on LinkedIn. Same glass conference room, same long table. Different energy. 5 people sat inside when I arrived. 2 store managers, the interim CFO, a restructuring advisor from Chicago, and Diane Keller, the accountant who wouldn't meet my eyes the first time. This time, she did. Thank you for coming, Evelyn, the advisor said, standing to shake my hand. His name was Michael Porter. He spoke like someone used to walking into messes that didn't belong to him. I'm here to observe, I said, and to answer questions within scope. He nodded. Understood. They walked through the damage methodically. Vendor trust eroded. Credit lines paused. Employees anxious. The company wasn't bankrupt, but it was bruised. What Margaret built was resilient, Michael said. But resilience needs stewardship. No one disagreed. At one point, the CFO asked, if the board were reconstituted, would you consider a temporary advisory seat? The room went still. I didn't answer immediately. Only if the goal is stabilization, I said finally. Not image repair. Michael smiled faintly. It always starts as stabilization. I left without committing to anything. Outside, the air felt lighter. Not because things were fixed, because they were no longer distorted. That evening, my mother showed up at my apartment. No warning, no call. She stood in the hallway holding a paper bag like a peace offering. Inside was a loaf of bread from the bakery she used to take me to as a child. The one she hadn't visited in years. I didn't know if you'd let me in, she said. I stepped aside. She sat on my couch, hands folded, posture uncertain. This was new. Judith Carter had never been uncertain in my presence. Vanessa moved out of her apartment, she said quietly. She's staying with a friend. I waited. She won't talk to me, my mother continued. She says I chose you. I looked at her then. Really looked. The lines around her eyes had deepened. The certainty she'd worn like armor for decades was gone. You didn't choose me, I said. You stopped choosing for her. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. I thought protecting her meant loving her, Judith said. I thought pushing you meant you were strong enough to handle it. I sat across from her. I was strong because I had to be. That's not the same thing. She nodded slowly, like someone finally understanding a language they'd pretended not to hear. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I want to be honest now. I believed her. Or at least, I believed she believed herself. Before she left, she hesitated at the door. Your grandmother used to say you had her spine, Judith said. I didn't know what she meant. I closed the door after her and leaned against it for a moment, breathing. At work, my new role expanded again. Legal looped me into a cross-company ethics review. HR asked for my input on governance training. People I'd never met knew my name now. Not because of drama, because of trust. The message from Uncle Raymond came late one night. Vanessa is blaming you publicly now. Careful. I looked it up. She'd given an interview to a regional business blog. Nothing outright defamatory, just enough implication to signal victimhood, family betrayal, sabotage, ambition masked as virtue. I closed the article without commenting. Allison had warned me this would happen. When people lose control of the narrative, they try to poison it. A week later, a formal offer arrived from the interim board. Advisory seat, 6 months, clear exit clause. I read it alone at my kitchen table, the city quiet outside my window. This was the moment my grandmother had anticipated. I could feel it, not the power, the choice. I signed. The first thing I did in my new role was request an independent audit of all contracts signed in the last 18 months. No exceptions. The second was insist on a staff meeting. In person. No press. No spin. I stood at the front of the flagship store, under the same floral arch my grandmother had insisted on keeping year-round. I'm not here to replace anyone, I told them. I'm here to protect what shouldn't have been put at risk. Some nodded. Some watched warily. Trust doesn't reset. It rebuilds. That night, I received a text from a number I hadn't seen in months. Vanessa, you think you won. You have no idea what you've started. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back one sentence. Evelyn, I didn't start this. I finished pretending it wasn't happening. She didn't reply, but I knew something then. This wasn't over, because when someone loses status, they don't grieve quietly. They look for leverage. And Vanessa had always been good at finding it. Vanessa didn't come at me directly. That was the first mistake everyone expected her to make. And the one she didn't. Instead, she went sideways. It started with an anonymous email sent to the Carter Floral Group board, copied to vendors and 2 local reporters. No accusations spelled out, just questions, carefully phrased. Poison wrapped in professionalism. Concerns have been raised regarding the impartiality of recent advisory appointments. Is it appropriate for a non-heir family member to exert influence following a contested inheritance? Was the investigation truly independent or shaped by internal family conflict? No names, no proof, just enough smoke to make people wonder where the fire was. Michael Porter called me within the hour. She's trying to destabilize confidence, he said. Not legally, socially. I expected that, I replied. You're calm, he noted. I'm prepared, I said. The board issued a neutral response. Short, factual, boring. It acknowledged the audit, reaffirmed governance changes, and declined further comment. Vanessa escalated anyway. 2 days later, my performance at work came under sudden scrutiny. HR flagged a conflict of interest review request. Routine, on paper. Targeted, in timing. I welcomed it. I handed them disclosures dating back 7 years. Every consulting role, every financial interest, every signature. The review closed in 48 hours. Clean. That was when Vanessa shifted again. She went personal. A mutual acquaintance forwarded me a screenshot from a private social media group, one I hadn't known existed. Family Accountability Forum, Midwest Chapter. Vanessa had posted a long message there, not naming me outright, but describing a younger sister who weaponized regulatory systems to punish ambition and turned a grieving family into a spectacle. The comments were divided. Some praised her resilience. Others asked uncomfortable questions. I didn't respond. Not there, not anywhere, because that wasn't the arena that mattered. The real confrontation came a week later, and it came with witnesses. Carter Floral Group hosted a closed-door holiday planning summit for senior staff and key vendors. It was meant to reassure partners before the winter season. Vanessa wasn't invited. She showed up anyway. I was in the conference room reviewing agenda notes when the doors opened abruptly. Conversation stalled. Heads turned. Vanessa Carter stood there in a camel coat, hair perfectly styled, posture composed, like she belonged. I was invited, she said calmly, looking around. By legacy. No one moved. Michael stepped forward. This is a closed meeting. I built this company, Vanessa replied. You don't get to erase me. I finally stood. You didn't build it, I said. Not loudly, not angrily. You managed it. Briefly. Her eyes snapped to mine. So this is it, she said. You take my place and pretend it's justice. I didn't take anything, I replied. You lost it. The room went silent. Vanessa laughed once, sharp. You always needed an audience. I met her gaze. No, You do. She turned to the room. Ask her why she really did this. Ask her what she got out of it. No one spoke. Then David Ramirez, the logistics manager, cleared his throat. We asked. She answered. Another vendor nodded. With documents. A third voice followed. And restraint. Vanessa looked around, searching for support that wasn't there. This isn't over, she said finally, voice tight. I nodded. You're right. She left, without another word. Afterward, the meeting resumed. Awkwardly at first, then normally. Like a storm passing that no one wanted to discuss. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief. Finality. The next morning, Allison called. She's filed a civil claim, she said. Emotional distress, defamation, interference. I closed my eyes. Of course she has. Allison's tone was calm. It's weak, but it will be loud. Then we respond quietly, I said. We did. Motion to dismiss. Documentation attached. Timeline included. No commentary. While the legal process moved at its slow, grinding pace, something else happened. My mother stopped defending Vanessa. She didn't attack her. She didn't condemn her. She just stopped explaining her away. That shift mattered more than any ruling. One evening, Judith came with me to the flagship store after hours. We walked between the displays my grandmother had designed herself. She used to rearrange these every season, my mother said softly, even when it hurt to stand. She loved the details, I replied. Judith nodded. I loved the image. I didn't respond. She stopped near the back wall, where an old photo hung. My grandmother at 35, sleeves rolled up, hands dirty, smiling without permission. I didn't protect her legacy, Judith said. I protected comfort. That was as close to ownership as she could get. The civil claim was dismissed 3 weeks later. No merit, no damages, no appeal. Vanessa posted one final message online after that. Short, bitter, vague. Then she disappeared. If you've made it this far, pause with me for a moment. This is usually the point in stories where people expect satisfaction, a victory speech, a neat ending. But real life doesn't work that way. Sometimes the win is quieter. Sometimes it's just the absence of noise where chaos used to live. If you've ever had to stand your ground while someone tried to rewrite your motives, you know what this chapter feels like. Like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you've ever been painted as the villain for refusing to back down. Because the next part isn't about confrontation. It's about consequence. And consequence doesn't announce itself. It just settles in. When the noise finally died down, the silence felt unfamiliar. For years, my life had been shaped by reaction, anticipating moods, adjusting language, preemptively shrinking to avoid conflict. Now, there was nothing to brace for, and that absence took getting used to. The advisory role settled into something routine. Every Tuesday at 9 a.m., I joined a call with the interim board. Financials stabilized, vendors renewed contracts. The audit wrapped with recommendations instead of penalties. Carter Floral Group wasn't thriving yet, but it was breathing on its own again. And for the first time, no one asked me to soften the truth. One afternoon, Michael Porter pulled me aside after a meeting. You know they're going to ask you to stay, he said. I didn't look surprised. I know. Will you? He asked. I thought of my grandmother's letter, of how deliberately she had stepped back instead of clinging to control. No, I said. I was never meant to run it. I was meant to steady it. He smiled. That sounds like her. At work, my own career took a turn I hadn't anticipated. Legal formally offered me a permanent cross-functional role, overseeing compliance and ethics across 3 subsidiaries. It came with a title change, a salary increase, and something else that mattered more: autonomy. I accepted without hesitation. The first real consequence came from my mother. Not public, not dramatic, just lonely. Judith Carter called me one Sunday afternoon in late November. Vanessa isn't coming for Thanksgiving, she said. I waited. She says she needs distance from the family, my mother continued. From me, I closed my eyes. I'm sorry. I don't know how I didn't see it sooner, Judith said quietly. I kept choosing peace over truth, and now I have neither. We spent Thanksgiving together that year, just the 2 of us. Simple food, no performance. It wasn't warm, but it was real. As winter settled in, the company announced its new governance structure. Independent board members, clear oversight, no family overrides. My name wasn't anywhere in the press release. That was intentional. One evening, I drove past the Maple Drive house again, the one that had been sold months earlier. New owners, new paint. The lights were on inside. I didn't feel loss. I felt release. Because what mattered had never been the house. It had been the pattern. The final consequence came quietly, in an email forwarded by Allison Moore. Vanessa had withdrawn her remaining claims and signed a non-disparagement agreement as part of the settlement closure. No apology, no reconciliation, just an ending. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my grandmother's letter spread open beside me. She hadn't given me power. She had given me clarity. I realized then that revenge, when it's quiet, doesn't look like destruction. It looks like alignment. You stop orbiting someone else's gravity, and they feel the absence. The next chapter wouldn't be about them at all. It would be about what happens after you choose yourself, and how different life feels when you no longer need permission to exist in it. The first time I realized my life had actually changed, it wasn't during a meeting or a phone call. It was on a Wednesday night in January, standing in a grocery store aisle, staring at two nearly identical jars of pasta sauce. No rush, no anxiety, no voice in my head asking what someone else would think if I chose the wrong one. I picked one and moved on. That was new. For most of my life, decisions came with echoes. My mother's expectations, Vanessa's confidence, the unspoken rule that I was allowed to exist but not disrupt the balance. Even after everything that happened, I still caught myself waiting for correction. But it didn't come. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. Work settled into a rhythm that felt earned. My new role spanned 3 subsidiaries, each with their own politics, their own quiet power struggles. I noticed the patterns immediately. The favoritism disguised as mentorship, the unspoken hierarchies, the people who benefited most from confusion. And I did something radical. I named things early, not aggressively, not emotionally, just clearly. It surprised people, especially the ones who were used to operating in fog. "You're direct," one executive said after a meeting. "I'm precise," I replied. He didn't know the difference yet. He would. At Carter Floral Group, the interim advisory period came to its natural close. I submitted my final report, complete with risk controls, succession recommendations, and one last note written in plain language. Legacy isn't preserved by blood. It's preserved by behavior. Michael Porter thanked me privately. "Your grandmother would have liked how you handled this," he said. "I think she already did," I replied. I didn't attend the formal announcement of the new board. I didn't need to. The company no longer felt like unfinished business. It felt complete. My relationship with my mother shifted slowly, like ice cracking under weight. Judith didn't become warm overnight. She didn't suddenly know how to say the right things. But she stopped defending the wrong ones. That mattered. One afternoon, she asked if she could come over. She sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd read my grandmother's letter so many times. Her hands rested flat on the surface, like she was grounding herself. "I'm trying to learn how to listen without fixing," she said. I studied her face, the lines, the effort. "That's a start," I replied. She nodded. "I don't expect you to make this easy for me." "I won't," I said. "But I'm not trying to punish you either." We sat in silence for a while. Not awkward, just honest. "I used to think strength looked like Vanessa," Judith said finally. "Confident, assertive, unapologetic." "And now?" I asked. She looked at me. "Now I think strength looks like restraint and memory." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Vanessa remained absent. No messages, no indirect attacks, no updates passed through relatives. It was as if she'd folded herself out of the family narrative entirely. For a while, I wondered if that would hurt. It didn't. Because absence, when chosen, is different from abandonment. I wasn't being left anymore. I was being left alone. One evening, while organizing old documents, I found a photo tucked into my grandmother's letter envelope. I hadn't noticed it before. It must have slipped out at some point and found its way back. It was taken decades ago, My grandmother standing in front of the original flower shop, apron on, hair pinned back, looking straight at the camera like it had dared her to flinch. On the back, in faded ink, she'd written a single sentence: "You don't owe anyone, you're quiet." I sat there for a long time holding that photo. All my life, I thought keeping the peace meant keeping myself small. That dignity meant endurance. That love was measured by how much discomfort you could absorb without complaint. I understood now how wrong that was. Dignity isn't passive, it's maintained. And sometimes, maintaining it costs you relationships that were only stable as long as you stayed silent. That winter, I started sleeping better, eating better, saying no without rehearsing explanations in my head. I stopped explaining my choices to people who hadn't earned context. And something else happened. Quietly, people began trusting me with their truths. A colleague confided about being sidelined by a superior. A vendor admitted fear about speaking up. A friend said she'd been called selfish for setting boundaries with her parents. I didn't offer speeches. I listened because I knew how much that mattered. One night, as snow fell outside my apartment windows, my mother sent me a message. "I found another box of your grandmother's things. Do you want to go through them together sometime?" Together. I stared at the word longer than necessary. "Yes," I typed back. "I do." I didn't know what reconciliation would look like long term. I wasn't rushing it. I wasn't chasing it. I was allowing it. Conditionally. On honesty. On accountability. On the understanding that I wouldn't disappear again to make things comfortable. That was the boundary. And for the first time, it held. By the end of that month, I realized something that would have terrified me a year earlier. Even if my family never fully understood me, I would be fine. Because I finally did. And that was enough to change everything. The last box was lighter than I expected. My mother and I sat on opposite ends of my living room floor. The space between us filled with open cardboard boxes and decades of quiet history. Old recipe cards, yellowed receipts, holiday photos curled at the edges. My grandmother's handwriting appeared everywhere, steady and unapologetic. Judith lifted an object from the box and froze. It was a small, brass key. "I wondered where this went," she said softly. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to a safety deposit box my grandmother had kept at a local credit union. I'd known about it as a child, but after her death, no one mentioned it again. "Do you want to open it?" my mother asked. I considered it, then nodded. We went together the next morning. No lawyers, no board members, just the two of us, sitting across from a teller who slid the metal box onto the counter like it was something ordinary. Inside were documents, deeds from early storefronts, handwritten notes about hiring decisions, a single envelope addressed to no one. Judith reached for it, then stopped. "You should." I opened it. There was no new revelation inside, no secret accusation, no last-minute twist. Just one page. Margaret Lewis Carter had written, "If you're reading this together, then something went right." I felt my throat tighten, just slightly. My grandmother hadn't left instructions. She'd left permission. We didn't say much on the drive back. There was nothing left to process out loud. Some truths don't need commentary. They just need space. In the months that followed, my life continued quietly, intentionally. I settled fully into my role at work, building systems designed to outlast personalities. I stopped volunteering emotional labor where it wasn't valued. I started choosing rest without guilt. My mother and I found a rhythm that wasn't performative. Weekly calls, occasional dinners. No pretending that things were healed when they weren't. But also, no denial that something had changed. She stopped comparing me to Vanessa. That alone felt monumental. Vanessa remained gone. Not physically, but narratively. Her name stopped coming up. Her absence stopped being explained. And in that absence, something unexpected happened. The family stabilized. Not in the way people imagine, with apologies and reunions and group photos, but in a quieter way. People adjusted to reality. They stopped expecting me to bend. They stopped expecting my mother to explain. They stopped pretending the past hadn't happened. One evening, after a long week, I sat alone on my balcony and watched the city settle into night. I thought about the version of myself from a year earlier. The woman who questioned her own memory, who wondered if standing up meant she was cruel. who mistook endurance for virtue. I didn't recognize her anymore, not because she was weak, but because she hadn't been allowed to be whole yet. I understood now that what I'd done wasn't revenge in the way people like to dramatize it. There was no gloating, no victory lap, no satisfaction in watching someone else fall. There was only alignment. I told the truth when it mattered. I didn't soften it to be palatable. I didn't weaponize it to punish. I let it stand. And the consequences followed naturally. That's the part people don't talk about enough. You don't have to destroy someone to stop being harmed by them. You just have to stop participating in the version of the story that benefits them. The night before my birthday, my mother called. "I'm proud of you," she said. No qualifiers, no conditions. I believed her. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet and let that land. Not because I needed it, but because it no longer controlled me. If you've listened this far, I want to leave you with this. If you're being told you're selfish for setting boundaries, you're not. If you're being painted as difficult for asking questions, you're not. If someone only values you when you're silent, that's not love. That's convenience. I spent years shrinking myself to preserve peace that wasn't real. The moment I stopped doing that, everything shifted. Not instantly, not easily, but permanently. And if you're standing at that same edge right now, wondering whether telling the truth will cost you too much, here's what I learned the hard way. Silence costs more. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like it, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you've ever had to choose yourself when no one else would, leave a comment. I read every one. This wasn't just a story about family drama, inheritance, or betrayal. It was a story about choosing dignity over approval. And once you do that, there's no going back. There's only forward. And that's exactly where I'm going.